we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. We are glad that you're here, that you're joining us. Co-presenting with me this evening, I'm thrilled because this is the first time that we've been able to present together, is Jamie Hales. She is at Saginaw ISD and does a lot of work with English language arts at the secondary level with coaching, and she's also a social studies nerd. So the best of both worlds, right, Jamie? I'm going to go ahead and get us started. She's going to continue to admit people who are coming in. Just a reminder, though, if you haven't already, put your name in the chat. If you want SCECHs, that would be very much appreciated. And without further ado, you also have the link to the entire folder that we are using tonight. It was put into the chat room, so it's in the very beginning of the chat, and I think Jamie just put it in again. So you should all be able to go and access everything that we're going to be using for the next 40 to 50 minutes. All righty. So thank you very much. And I am going to share my screen so that we can get started. All righty. So this is really about engaging students in texts. And when we talk about that, we are really talking about different types of texts. And as we go through our time tonight, we're going to talk about what that can look like and how standards, we all know that we work with a lot of them, right? Everything from the C3 framework to the state social studies standards and an awful lot of literacy standards as well. We're going to talk about how there are standards and practices and indicators, and that they can all kind of play nicely together in the text box. So as we think about that, I really think that as you go through this session tonight, maybe think about social studies as being really an application of a lot of those language arts skills, combined with the critical thinking skills that center on specific concepts in social studies. Everything from the content that we teach and to the ways of thinking like a historian or a geographer, etc. So we're going to be trying to merge those as we continue our discussion and our work tonight. Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you so that you can reference one of the articles that we really use to guide our work.
All right, hi everyone. Like Becky said, I'm so excited to be presenting with her today. We've talked quite a bit, but we've never had the opportunity to present together. Becky, can you go to the next slide for us? All right, so as we are going to start our work, we thought it'd be nice if we just kind of all got on the same page with the C3 framework and our understanding, and really building that background information that we need around our instructional shifts. So what we're going to do, we have an article and it's linked in that folder, and I'll also put a direct link in the chat for you too in a second. And we'd like you to go through and read the article. I think it's only 2, maybe 3 pages, so it's not long. But as you are going through it, we thought we would try the word, sentence, phrase protocol. If you're adaptive schools and you know, you're probably familiar with that. I see some people shaking their heads. So just as you're going through, be thinking about a word that maybe really stands out to you, a sentence that maybe you are questioning, or a sentence that you really feel like you could support or maybe argue for or against, and a phrase that you want to bring to the whole group as well. Just jot them down on a piece of paper. We'll do a quick share out afterwards. Low pressure, nothing too, I'm not going to call on anybody randomly, so just real low pressure. Let me go ahead and drop that link to the article in the chat just in case you can't get into the folder yet. Okay, it's there now. Let's take about 5 minutes to read. I'll set the timer. And then that will give us about 2 or 3 minutes to kind of share out our word, sentence, and phrase. Questions before you get into the article? I have to say, some of you have some really cute Bitmojis as your screensaver. So as I'm talking to you, it's cute. All right, go ahead and you guys can get into the article. All right, my timer went off. Hopefully you were able to get through the article. So we had asked for you to pull out a word, a sentence, or a phrase from the article that really spoke to you or that you want to bring to the group. Does anybody want to unmute and share one of their word, sentences, or phrases? Thanks, Becky, for sharing again.
Mine was inquiry.
Okay.
Instruction.
Do you want to share why you picked that one, or you just did?
I just did, but I just looking at ways that that we can use questioning to like guide students like thought process and get them engaged more in text. So that that just kind of jumped off the page at me.
Mm-hmm. I really appreciate how you said get them engaged in texts, which implies our students are active, right? And that they are part of that text and the application of that text. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Anybody else like to share their word or their sentence or their phrase?
I really like the where it said students in social studies use their C3 inquiries as a launching pad for action. I just really liked how they phrased it as launching pad for action.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't write that one down, but I like how they said that as well, because again, it also implies the application, right? That engagement and that application, that we're doing something with the work that we're asking our students to do. I see in the chat we have some other literacy. Yep, someone put literacy in there and collaborate. Anybody want to, you put it in the chat, so I'm assuming you don't want to unmute, but if you put it in the chat and want to unmute and talk about it, feel free.
Can I add real quick?
I would love you to add.
Okay, critique arguments and explanations. I think that that's really powerful. We ask our kids to write an argument, but I think when they have the skill to critique an explanation, that means they even know it at a higher level. So being able to find those pieces and adding that evidence really elevates, which was one of my other things that I wrote down, elevate practices. And I think that's so true when we can get them to that higher level thinking.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. It goes back to how Becky started us out, right? With that application of those skills into what we're asking our students to do.
I just also wanted to mention the whole idea of the action piece is too often we love our content so much and we find the application, and unless we connect the dots for our kids, we'll never answer the question, why do I got to learn this? Because if it's just about getting a grade or an assignment or getting credit, we're not really civically preparing them for their future. And to have informed action, oh my God, even better, because everybody's got opinions, but do you have any substance behind that? And then what happens when you're confronted with some alternative facts? Man, that's like good stuff. So anyway.
Yes, very good. Can I just say, I love presenting at MCSS for this reason right here. Like, this was great. It's my favorite conference to be at and present at. I see that we're still adding more things to the chat, and that's wonderful. We'll just kind of keep bringing some of those up perhaps as we're going through. Becky's going to take us into the C3 a little bit deeper now.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. this is just a quick diagram that I had put together to kind of illustrate each of the dimensions of the C3 framework. As we think about critical literacy, in addition to all of the other literacies that we're supposed to be juggling at the same time. But the dimension one, really around that inquiry. Tonight, we're going to be really focusing on dimensions 2. When we look at disciplinary literacy, what does it really mean to have students thinking like a historian or a geographer or an economist? And then we're going to also spend a little bit of time with dimension 3 and dimension 4, because those are really the dimensions where a lot of the reading and writing standards come into play, as well as the disciplinary literacy essential practices come into play as well. And if you take a look at kind of the picture within the picture down at in the bottom right corner, you can see that when the reading and writing Common Core ELA standards for literacy with regard to history and social studies came out, these were the fundamental shifts that the ELA teams that worked on the Common Core state standards had really felt were going to be essential. And as you look at those, you probably are thinking, we do a lot of those shifts automatically in our social studies classrooms. We're just going to be a little bit more transparent about that tonight as we talk through some of the strategies and some of the things that we really want to emphasize. As we talked about a few minutes ago, and this is really kind of the heart of the work that Jamie and I do with the GELN Disciplinary Literacy Task Force, right? If we think about the increasing specialization of literacy, that intermediate level is really when students are focusing on context clues to increase their comprehension. They're focusing on how a text might be structured, or they might be comparing text structures. Those are all the kinds of skills that come into play with that intermediate level. When we think about the pinnacle of the triangle, that's really where a lot of that disciplinary literacy comes into play. Does anybody happen to know who my favorite historian is there in the picture? Shout it out. Nobody? Doris Kearns Goodwin. She's my gal. I love reading her books. But she is a true historian, right? And so when you think about, okay, someone like Doris Kearns Goodwin, as a historian, practices her craft. How is she thinking? And what are some of those questions that she's continually asking of her sources as she's doing her research? The same thing goes for the work that a geographer might engage in, or an economist. So tonight we're really going to kind of toggle back and forth between those two levels with regard to increasing specialization of literacy.
So as our students move up in their social studies classes, we're asking them to become more sophisticated in their thinking, moving beyond that reporting to that explaining and interpreting. Someone already said it earlier about that critical and that analysis and that really digging in. Making claims, I heard that earlier as well. It's almost like you guys had a preview of what we were going to talk about historical events. And it requires that shift in writing. That requires new language tools. And we have documents and research that supports this shift. So we just wanted to talk briefly about these documents, just so you know that they're out there and where to access them. Becky was too kind and put them all in a folder for us. So as you move beyond tonight, and into next week and probably next month or next fall, and this comes back to the surface, they're all there and gathered for you. The first one that I want to talk about is this one right here in the middle, the GELN 612 Disciplinary Literacy Essentials. And Becky already talked about the work that's happening with GELN around those. But I want to take you to, Becky, can you go to the next slide for us real quick? There, thank you. To the website that, oh, and this is what we didn't think about, Becky. Can you go to the website for us? To where the essentials are. And the purpose of the essentials, when Becky's pulling up that website, is to improve the adolescent literacy by providing 10 research-supported practices. I don't know about you guys, but when I was in my classroom, I wasn't reading research. I was reading everything else I had to do, and research really I didn't have time for it. So to me, it's refreshing knowing that we have research-supported practices that I now know are going to have an impact on my students in my classroom. Let's see if I can pull up the website for us and share it just real quick, just so you can kind of see what it looks like. Oh, no, I can't. It's linked there for you. So you can pull it up when you get a chance to. But when we look at those 10 practices, I do want to point out to you that there's actually 50 practices because they're broken out by discipline. So along the side, if you click on where it says social studies, that's going to take you to where we want our 612 teachers of social studies to live. So just kind of don't freak out if you see something about math, that's not your section. Go to the social studies section. The other thing that we put in here, and I know that we're probably all familiar with this, at least we've seen it a little bit, is that are the Common Core standards for reading and writing in history and social studies. And when we, again, Becky was kind of put them in the folder for you, but when you look there, you're going to see that we're asking our students to cite evidence and to determine central ideas and information, identify key steps. So again, it's that application. We're moving beyond the reporting and that applying. And then the next one is that the diagram that Becky already talked about, but as we move on, we're going to really focus on that number 4, that text-based answers. There we go. That number 4, that text-based answers. So we've already started talking about some of those shifts, but for the purpose of our time and today, that's where we're going to focus.
So if you take a look at this slide, again, as Jamie had said, there's a huge focus with regard to text-based answers. You know, you think about the kind of work that we have our students doing in classrooms, especially with primary and secondary source documents. And really, this is one of the largest shifts that has occurred between pre-Common Core state standards and post, right? And the key here is that the questions are purposefully planned and they direct students to closely examine the text. However, we're really getting away from the look back and locate the answer type of process, right? So we need students to be thinking about yes, there are questions that are tied directly to the text or texts, and we have to use those texts in order to cite our answers. And from those citations really comes the evidence for making those claims that we choose to make in our writing. Personal opinions and experiences and connections to the text tend to be minimized in favor of what the text actually says or doesn't say. And so these are all pretty significant shifts when we talk about the role that text-based answers play in student thinking as they are interacting with the text. And here is just an example. This would be something that might have occurred before the Common Core state standards and the literacy standards specifically. You can take a look at that excerpt. But again, the question that students might be asked would be to describe how John Brown's raid increased tensions between the North and the South. It's really one-dimensional. And again, students can read, and from this excerpt, they probably are going to be able to get an idea by focusing on maybe a key phrase or word or sentence. If we compare that to something that would be considered a post Common Core literacy standard, right? You can see that now we're working with two different pieces of text, and the question might be something a little more rigorous, in that we might be asking students to compare and contrast the reaction of John Brown's hanging by those two newspaper excerpts. You can see that as you're skimming them, there are two very different reactions going on there. And then to further have students think about how those two articles could contribute or add to the tensions between the North and the South that had already existed at that time. So we might ask students to use specific answers or examples from those two texts in order to support a statement or statements. Jamie, do you want to tackle dimension 3?
Sure. So when we talk about dimension 3, it's the gathering and evaluating sources and developing claims and using evidence. When we talk about our 612 essentials, we're actually we talk about the idea of diverse texts, and we talk about conversations around those texts, the vocabulary around that text. So when we look at dimension 3, that's really what we're asking our students to do.
And when we get into dimension 4, we take it to that next level of communicating those conclusions, right? We want students to understand that there's a method behind the madness, so to speak. If they're going to be researching because they really want an answer to a compelling question that might deal with or address an enduring issue, we want them to be able to communicate their conclusions in a way that their peers, as well as others, if they're writing for a different audience, can understand. And then part of that is also being able to critique the conclusions of others and what that looks like and how to help each other in making their conclusions stronger. Right? We talk often in social studies classrooms about multiple perspectives. Here's where multiple perspectives from dimension 2 really can come into play and be of great assistance in dimension 4. And then the last part of that, taking informed action, usually this tends to be somewhat difficult because it can be very time consuming. But I think if we think about taking informed action as having 3 different steps to it, whereas the third step is the actual action itself, I think we can pick and choose when we want students to actually take that action itself, or if we want them to assess a course of action, if there's a proposed solution to a problem or a conclusion to an inquiry. So we wanted to share a strategy that we thought might really kind of get to a lot of what you would come across if you were to make a chart or a matrix of not just the disciplinary literacy essential practices that Jamie has referenced earlier, but also when we take into consideration those Common Core literacy standards in reading and in writing. And then when we think about the skills from Dimension 3 and Dimension 4 in the C3 framework, there's a lot of overlap there. They might be worded a little differently, but some of the skills are very, very similar and are congruent across each of those sets of standards and practices. So we thought there might be, let's spend a little bit of time with one of those strategies that I think might really do a nice job of illustrating some of the common skills that kind of come into play or that run and run across those documents. So this strategy is called whiteout, comes from a very good friend and colleague of mine. And we selected whiteout again because they are great. It's a great strategy to help students really practice with analysis of primary source documents. In addition, through the conversation, we can really help students focus on their choice, and you'll see what I mean in just a moment, and the multiple perspectives of the thinking that is behind the selection of the choice. And really, I think you're going to see some connections to key ideas and details, which are the first three literacy standards for reading. And so we thought we might actually give this one a try and see how everyone kind of does with their primary source document analysis practice. You guys, I'm sure will all come up with the correct answers since we do this all the time, right? So in the folder that you have access to, you have that document. You have that whiteout document. Let me just set this up by saying that what we would like you to do is to just take a couple of minutes and read that the excerpts of that document. It was actually a letter that was written in 1886 to President Cleveland. As you are reading excerpts from that letter, we didn't put the entire letter in because typically we don't have students analyzing an entire primary source document. I mean, let's face it, they tend to be lengthy sometimes. But what we would like you to do is to read those excerpts from that letter and be thinking about which of the choices, which of the people below, choice A, B, C, or D, might have been the person who wrote that letter to President Cleveland. So if you can take a couple minutes, make your decision, and then maybe jot down a sentence or two that might explain the reason for your choice. So if you selected choice B, what made you lean towards choice B, right? And if you can be specific, like, well, maybe it was a context clue, right? Or a key phrase, that's great. So we're going to give you a couple of minutes to do that. And then we're going to have some discussion in our breakout rooms, depending on which letter you chose for your answer. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to look at the excerpts and make your decision. We're now going to be going into breakout rooms in just a moment. It would be extremely helpful to us if you could rename yourself, and in front of your name, just put the letter that you chose. So for example, if Tiffany chose choice A, she might type a capital letter A in front of her name. If you are not sure how to rename yourself, if you hover by your name on the participant list, you usually see the mute button, and then you see a button that indicates or that is labeled more. And if you click on the more, you should be able to rename. If you click on rename, you can then put the letter that you selected in front of your name. Alrighty, so we're just going to very quickly do a quick popcorn. Those of you who selected choice A, is there one person from group A that wanted to just give us 10, 20 seconds of probably your consensus with regard to why you selected choice A?
We all kind of agreed that it seemed like they were worried about losing the mining and the farming and those things. And it made sense that the railroad would be a reason that those things would be taken away.
Okay, so you've really focused on a lot of the content that you saw in the letter.
Yes.
Okay, how about group B?
We noticed at the end that it said General Mills plan, and so we figured it's probably about General Mills plan. Because I don't know.
Okay, all right. How about group C?
I shouldn't have picked C. That's my problem. I wasn't doing this like I should have. So we both changed our mind and decided that C was not the answer that we should have picked anyway.
Okay, how about group D?
Well, with Group D, we had 3 different things that we pulled out. One was that there were it said few of them. The second one was that the people of New Mexico were victims of these people, so that they were kind of under attack from this group. And the third one was something to the effect of welfare and civilization of this group of people, which is really just that's how we treated Native Americans back in the day, is we felt that they were uncivilized and we just needed to bring civilization to them. So those 3 elements made us choose D.
So it really sounded like you focused on a lot of context clues, of the way that maybe the letter was structured. You were able to figure out that the subject was really a particular group of people instead of like the railroad, which was another choice.
Yeah, the word victim was really the one, because civilization could have matched the railroad, right? Because the railroad would bring civilization to that
Right.
area. But the victim of, I think, was the thing that triggered that it was a group of people.
Do you think that students maybe would have thought victim of big business, like the railroads?
Yeah, it could, and I'd probably accept that if they had evidence, if they made their thinking visible that that's what they were going after.
Absolutely, and you just brought us around to that last point. So thanks, Ryan. As you can see, this is a kind of strategy that again really has students focusing on that analysis, to look closely at the text and how it's organized, how the language is used and crafted, right? And a lot of these focuses happen to be embedded within the practices like Jamie had talked about previously, as well as in this case, the reading standards. And again, Dimension 3 really comes into play when we're working with a lot of the reading standards and some of the reading strategies. So we are hoping that you could kind of make that connection in looking at this type of a strategy. I know that we're short on time, so I want to end it there, but I do want to let you know that we've put a couple of other slides in the presentation. Give those a look because there are some other resources. Jamie, is there anything that you want to add?
No, I think that's it. Just thank you for spending your evening with us.
Thanks. And if anyone has any questions, Jamie,
Thank you.
stick around, so feel free to give us a shout.
What was the right answer?
It was, I believe it's D, letter D, the governor of the territory. And the subject was the Indian removal.
Thank you very much. Really, really nice session. Thank you.
Lori?
Yes. See you all tomorrow.
Thank you so much.